Today, we're counting down the most stupid ways people actually died. From a motorcyclist who thought he was a stunt god, right up until he became a human fireball, to a homeowner whose brilliant DIY pool hack turned into a fatal trap so dangerous that no sane person would ever do. It was April 19, 2016, in Valenzuela City, Philippines. The industrial estate sat empty after midnight, warehouses dark and access roads cleared. Sodium streetlights cast uneven yellow light on wide concrete lanes, still warm from the day. Dust and rubber residue slicked the surface, creating open stretches where speed built unnoticed. 3 friends were in the garage that evening. One was Marco Reyes, 24, a delivery rider who spent most days on a lightweight motorcycle and most nights maintaining it himself. He had recently modified the exhaust and fuel mapping for louder sound and visible flame, a common street setup. He rode methodically, tracked changes, and practiced stunts in empty industrial zones. Eli Navarro, 21, was an automotive technology student who filmed rides and repairs, focusing on heat, brakes, and tire behavior. Jonas Cruz, 23, worked nearby warehouse and handled logistics, locations, timing, and supplies. Their videos were shared casually, chasing reactions, not money. That night, Marco planned a sustained burnout sequence on an empty access road, recorded on a phone mounted close for a clear view of the rear wheel and exhaust. The pavement was smooth but lightly coated with fine industrial dust and rubber debris. The bike had already been running at an elevated temperature from earlier passes. The exhaust housing showed visible discoloration, indicating prolonged heat soak. Eli pointed out the glow. Marco acknowledged it and continued. Stopping mid-run would have meant waiting for the system to cool and restarting the recording. Even as the exhaust temperature climbed, fuel fumes thickened and the metal shifted from dull steel to a visible glow. Marco applied the rear brake and opened the throttle fully. The rear tire spun in place, producing dense white smoke that drifted low across the ground. The exhaust glowed dull orange, then brightened toward yellow. Small, intermittent flames appeared at the exhaust tip as excess fuel ignited on contact with hot metal. Eli adjusted his framing while Jonas stood back. The engine remained at high RPM under load. Jonas suggested intensifying the effect and returned with a small plastic container of gasoline. The engine was still running, the exhaust already far beyond ignition temperature, and as fuel splashed onto the exposed header pipes near the engine, vapor ignited instantly on contact, sending a short but forceful plume of flame out of the exhaust. Fire rolled across Marco's lower body in a single surge as liquid fuel splashed onto the rear tire, igniting it and destroying traction on a tire already overheated and softened from the sustained burnout. Traction vanished, the motorcycle yawed sideways at roughly 35 to 40 miles per hour, and when Marco tried to correct, the rear slid again before the bike struck a concrete drainage barrier at an angle. Marco impacted chest first. The helmet chin bar transmitted force downward as his head flexed sharply forward, causing fatal neck injuries. Eli was knocked backward by the blast, inhaling superheated air and combustion byproducts before collapsing nearby. Jonas dropped the container as burning fuel spilled across the pavement, igniting his clothing. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Fire crews arrived in approximately 8 minutes, with paramedics shortly after. Marco showed no signs of life. Eli and Jonas suffered severe burn and inhalation injuries and were transported for emergency treatment. The post-mortem determined that Marco died from fatal neck injuries sustained during the impact. Eli and Jonas were treated for severe inhalation and burn injuries and survived. Investigators reconstructed the sequence using video, burn patterns, and mechanical inspection, finding no mechanical failure beyond heat-related loss of traction. In response, local officials increased nighttime patrols and installed temporary barriers in industrial zones to discourage after-hours riding. Repair shops posted anonymized warnings. The road reopened by morning. Fire residue cleared and traffic resumed as scheduled. But speed wasn't the only thing people were pushing for attention. In the next case, the risk wasn't mechanical or shared. It was taken alone, in silence, with a camera pointed inward instead of down the road. It was September 7th, 2017, in Chonburi Province, Thailand. The air was already warm before sunrise, humidity clinging low over quiet residential streets. Motorbikes were absent, shop fronts shuttered, and palm-lined roads sat still. A phone rested on a small tripod outdoors, recording ambient sounds as the live stream prepared to begin. Naren Suksawat was 31 years old and worked full-time as an inventory clerk at a regional warehouse that handled auto parts and bulk hardware. His job required accuracy and repetition. He logged stock, flagged shortages, and stayed late when shipments arrived incomplete or mislabeled. Outside of work, he ran a small mukbang channel, uploading 3 videos a week. His audience was modest, usually between 2,000 and 5,000 views, but consistent. He was known for eating extreme items without reacting, never pausing, and never cutting away once he started. Friends later said Naren's channel centered on eating things most people avoided: charred firewood, grass, dried worms, raw starches, framed as conditioning rather than shock. Discomfort was treated as proof of progress. His setup was minimal: a folding table on the back patio, a clipped ring light, and a phone fixed at chest height. He filmed alone. Mukbang challenges depend on escalation, and unusual foods eventually stop drawing attention. Naren decided the next step was crossing from inedible to non-food. That morning, he retrieved a strip of old aluminum roofing from a maintenance shed. The metal was thin, oxidized, and uneven, with jagged edges from a prior cut, measuring roughly 12 inches long and less than an inch wide. He rinsed it briefly, laid it on a cutting board, and described aluminum as lightweight and flexible, comparing it to cookware materials. The risk was immediate. Unlike food, thin metal does not compress or dissolve under pressure. The strip was rigid and springy, capable of bending and snapping back with no safe breaking point. He adjusted the camera closer and remained seated. He started filming after 9 a.m. He explained the challenge again in a steady voice. He folded the aluminum once and raised it toward his mouth. He did not trim it or dull the edges. As he pushed the strip between his teeth, it bent sharply and then rebounded under pressure. The metal bent sharply as it entered his mouth. One jagged edge scraped along the back of his tongue and tore into the soft tissue of his throat instead of sliding downward. Naren gagged hard. The force of the reflex drove the aluminum against the back wall of the airway, cutting deeper as it caught. Blood began pouring into his mouth almost immediately, spilling past his lips and down his chin as torn tissue bled freely. He stood up abruptly, the chair tipping behind him, both hands clamped around his neck. He tried to pull the strip free, a movement later noted in the investigation report as a critical worsening factor. The aluminum shifted and twisted, scraping sideways across the throat and embedding more firmly. Bleeding increased. Blood flowed into the airway and was inhaled with each gasping attempt to breathe. His chest rose sharply, but airflow was limited, choked by swelling and pooled blood. He staggered out of the camera's frame as coughing turned wet and irregular. The recording continued without interruption. He collapsed out of view, leaving the camera on an empty frame as the sounds faded. A neighbor found him unresponsive and called for help. At the hospital, doctors performed an emergency surgical airway and removed the aluminum lodged crosswise in his throat, but oxygen loss had already caused fatal brain injury. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as asphyxiation due to massive airway bleeding and foreign body obstruction. Blood loss into the airway and rapid swelling prevented effective breathing. Once consciousness was lost, recovery was no longer possible. Naren's camera footage was later archived at the family's request. Months later, anonymized stills from the case appeared in industrial safety training, used to demonstrate why non-food materials can become fatal airway hazards. When discomfort stops being enough, people look for higher ground, sometimes literally. The next death didn't happen in a backyard or a garage, but on a cliff where danger was clearly marked and deliberately ignored. It was July 22, 2018. The coastal trail lay quiet under the late afternoon sun, waves breaking steadily against the rocks below. From above, the ocean looked calm, its reflective surface masking shallow shelves near shore. Warning signs marked safe diving areas farther on, while the nearby cliff edge remained worn smooth and open. One of the visitors that day was Ethan Morales, 32, a warehouse supervisor from inland California. His job involved managing loading schedules, coordinating crews, and filling in when shifts ran short. Outside of work, He stayed physically active, lifting weights and practicing basic parkour movements. He regularly posted short videos online, handstands, flips, controlled jumps, shared mostly with friends. The clips focused on execution rather than spectacle, and none had ever drawn a large audience. Ethan had performed backflips before on flat ground, grass, and into pools. He wasn't formally trained, but repetition had built confidence. During the hike, he stopped at a cliff overlooking the water, posted signs directed swimmers to a designated diving area farther along the coast, where the drop cleared into deep water. The ledge Ethan chose instead sat above uneven rock shelves that extended several feet before the water deepened. Conditions appeared calm, and that calm fed the mistake. Waves moved in steady sets, briefly covering the rocks before pulling back. From above, the surface looked flat, the foam disguising how close the stone shelves sat beneath it. Rather than walking to the marked diving area, Ethan treated the ledge like a platform. He set his phone behind him, framed the ocean, and stepped into position as if the water below were clear. Friends nearby pointed out the safer spot again. The signs were visible. The distance wasn't far. Ethan ignored it. He stayed where he was, rolled his shoulders once, and crept closer to the edge until his toes hung over the drop. He shuffled his feet to square his stance, glancing back at the phone to make sure it was recording. The choice wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. He took a short run up on the narrow rock and jumped. At first, everything looked right. His body tucked and rotated backward smoothly, the motion familiar from dozens of previous flips, but the launch angle was wrong. The cliff pushed him outward instead of projecting him forward. As he rotated, his downward path steepened. The rocks didn't fall away beneath him. They rose. He came down feet first, but not into open water. His left foot struck a submerged rock just below the surface. The ankle collapsed on impact, bone failing instantly. The abrupt stop twisted his body sideways in midair. Momentum carried the rest of him down hard. His right hip and lower back slammed into another rock at the waterline with enough force to fold his torso. His head snapped backward sharply, the neck taking the full force of the rotation. The impact knocked him limp, and his body slid off the rocks into the surf, disappearing beneath a breaking wave. He did not resurface. The phone continued recording as water surged over the rocks, leaving fresh scrape marks beneath the foam. People on the trail ran toward the shoreline and contacted emergency services, but rescue crews found no response. Paramedics documented multiple visible fractures and no signs of consciousness. He was transported to a nearby hospital, where imaging revealed multiple fractures to the lower limbs, a fractured pelvis, and a catastrophic cervical spine injury. The spinal cord had been damaged at the base of the neck. He was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by blunt force trauma from a fall onto rocks. The report noted that the injuries were consistent with a misjudged jump rather than a water entry. Posted signs directing visitors to approved diving areas were confirmed to be visible and intact. The video was reviewed during the investigation and returned to the family. Additional fencing was installed near the ledge weeks later. The designated diving area remained open. Scrape marks on the rocks below the cliff were still visible long after the incident. We've got more stupid deaths like this ahead, so subscribe if you want to see how ordinary choices made for attention or convenience can turn fatal in seconds. It was January 22, 2018. In a one-bedroom flat in Leeds, England, the day began without urgency. Heat cycled against the damp cold. Traffic moved steadily outside. Inside, the kitchen was neat, the microwave fixed above the counter. Nothing suggested danger. Routine ruled the quiet space in the morning. Oliver Grant was 28 years old and worked as an IT support technician for a regional logistics firm on the outskirts of the city. His workdays involved resolving help desk tickets, resetting passwords, repairing damaged laptops, and monitoring network issues that rarely drew attention unless systems failed. Co-workers described him as calm and methodical. He explained problems in plain terms and followed checklists closely. He lived alone, kept predictable hours, and rarely deviated from his schedule. Outside of work, Oliver spent time watching online content that presented itself as practical science. He followed creators who demonstrated everyday physical principles, productivity advice, and controlled experiments meant to show how common objects behaved under specific conditions. He recreated demonstrations at home occasionally, recording short clips on his phone to share privately with friends. He did not drink heavily, avoided drugs, and had no record of reckless behavior. He relied on demonstrations that appeared repeatable and measured. In the months leading up to that morning, Oliver had watched several videos about superheating water in a microwave. The demonstrations showed water heated past its normal boiling point without bubbling, then disturbed to trigger sudden boiling. The process was often described as manageable if handled carefully. Warnings about container choice and sealing were inconsistently mentioned. Most demonstrations used open cups, but that detail was rarely emphasized. The setups appeared clean and controlled. Oliver wanted to understand the process clearly enough to explain it without guessing. That morning, with work scheduled later in the afternoon and the flat quiet, he decided to try it himself. He filled a thick glass jar with tap water, twisted the metal lid on until it stopped, and checked it once more to make sure it was sealed. Believing the closed container would keep the reaction contained, he placed the jar in the microwave and set the timer longer than most examples suggested. Inside, the water heated evenly. With no scratches or particles to trigger bubbling, it rose past the boiling point in complete stillness. When the timer ended, Oliver opened the microwave and lifted the jar out with bare hands, gripping it carefully. The glass was hot but showed no cracks. The water inside looked completely still, with no bubbles or movement. Holding it at chest height, he gave it a single shake to disturb the surface. The reaction was instant. The superheated water flash-boiled, steam expanding faster than the sealed jar could release it. The glass burst violently outward. Glass fragments were propelled outward across the kitchen. Several shards struck the upper cabinets and embedded into drywall. One long shard struck the left side of Oliver's neck just below the jawline, penetrating deeply enough to sever the external carotid artery and surrounding vascular branches. Blood exited rapidly under arterial pressure. Oliver dropped the remains of the jar and staggered backward, pressing his hand to his neck. Blood pooled on the tile within seconds. Loss of blood volume progressed rapidly. He collapsed near the doorway between the kitchen and living area and lost consciousness in under a minute. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Paramedics arrived approximately 9 minutes later, but the bleeding had already been fatal. The post-mortem examination documented a sharp force vascular injury caused by high-velocity glass. There were no defensive wounds or signs of prolonged movement after collapse. The volume of blood loss was described as unsurvivable without immediate surgical intervention. Death was attributed to rapid circulatory failure. Investigators later noted glass fragments embedded in upper cabinets and lodged in the ceiling, consistent with a sealed container rupture rather than simple glass breakage. The microwave was removed as evidence. Oliver's employer circulated an internal safety notice advising against attempting online experiments at home. The flat was professionally cleaned, repaired, and rented again several weeks later. But not every hazard explodes outward. In the final case, the danger stayed hidden beneath still water, where a familiar setting and a casual decision left no time to recover. It was August 3, 2013. A Tampa backyard sat quiet after passing storms, air heavy and still. A rectangular pool reflected a pale sky, its surface barely moving except for a faint current at the deep end. Soft music played near the patio, masking any sign of danger that day. Lena Whitmore was 34 years old and worked as a real estate assistant for a mid-sized brokerage in Hillsborough County. Her role revolved around fixing problems before they slowed anyone else down. She handled incomplete paperwork, bypassed delays, and regularly improvised solutions when procedures felt unnecessary. Co-workers knew her as efficient and decisive, someone who believed most rules existed to protect people from their own lack of judgment rather than from real danger. That mindset carried into her personal life. When her boyfriend's backyard pool became the default gathering spot, Lena treated it like another system she could manage herself. Safety signage and restrictions annoyed her, and she believed modern warnings were written for people who didn't understand how things worked. Weeks earlier, the pool's main drain cover had cracked and been removed. Although a replacement was ordered, she chose not to shut the pool down. She inspected the opening, ran the pump, and tested the suction with her hand, concluding it wasn't strong enough to matter. When a service notice advised against using the pool until repairs were completed, she dismissed it as a liability precaution rather than a real safety concern. In the days leading up to the gathering, Lena adjusted the system on her own. She ran the pump longer to keep the water clear, reassured guests that the drain was harmless, and framed the missing cover as a cosmetic issue. She spoke confidently about residential pump limits, repeating that these systems were designed to prevent serious harm. The pool stayed open. The gathering began in the mid-afternoon. Drinks were available, and co-workers stood talking near the shallow end. Eventually, attention turned to the exposed drain. Someone pointed it out and said it didn't look safe. Lena dismissed the concern immediately, explaining that she had already checked it. When it was suggested the pump be turned off temporarily, she rejected the idea, saying it would undo the balance she had already set and cloud the water. To end the discussion, Lena swam toward the deep end. She positioned herself above the drain and said she would demonstrate that nothing would happen. She hovered briefly, then lowered herself until her body was centered directly over the opening. The pump was running at full filtration speed. Within seconds, suction fixed her in place. The shift was visible. Her posture stiffened and her arms moved down as she tried to push herself up. Her hands slipped against the pool floor. The force holding her down didn't fluctuate or weaken. It stayed constant. Water around her legs churned as the pump continued pulling. She tried again to lift free and couldn't. The sustained suction caused rapid internal injury. Soft tissue was pulled inward under continuous pressure, disrupting blood flow almost immediately. There was no visible external bleeding, but circulation failed quickly. Her movements became uncoordinated, then slowed. Within seconds, she stopped moving. Her body still sealed over the drain she had insisted was harmless. Emergency services were called as guests rushed to shut down the pump. The breaker panel was poorly labeled, delaying the shutdown and prolonging the suction. When power was finally cut, the pull released and Lena drifted backward in the water, motionless. She did not surface on her own. Paramedics arrived within minutes and pulled her from the pool onto the patio. CPR and advanced life support were initiated, but no pulse was detected and she did not respond. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by fatal internal trauma from suction entrapment that rapidly disrupted circulation and led to organ failure. The pool owner was cited for operating the pool without a drain cover, and civil penalties followed. Lena's employer later issued a safety notice and discontinued pool-related gatherings. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, check out these.